So Chris Jericho has had an interesting suggestion for NXT because he said it's kind of embarrassing at this point, NXT continually going up against AEW on Wednesday nights. Hello, we are watching the WrestleTalk podcast. I'm El Fakador Laurie Blake. I'm joined by Adam Blampied, and we're going to be reviewing NXT in just a bit. But I thought it'd be interesting to talk about this interview that Chris Jericho did with Inside the Ropes and Alex McCarthy, where they chatted a bit about AEW and stuff, and Jericho actually posed a question to Alex saying, why is NXT on a Wednesday night? And Alex said that it was obviously to oppose Dynamite. Jericho followed up saying, exactly, they came on Wednesday just to mess with us and they should take the head out of their ass and go make money. Don't worry about our company. We're not worried about you. We don't have a screen up that shows what's going on every moment on NXT like they do watching Dynamite. Leave us alone. Go do your own thing. Go to Tuesdays. Grab an extra 250,000 viewers. Finally get your demo where it needs to be because it's pretty embarrassing on a Wednesday night to go up against us. The demo god thing is not a gimmick. It's real. So go to Tuesday, go to Sunday, go to any day you want, but don't exist just to mess with us because we're beating you every week. It's kind of embarrassing for NXT at this point. He doesn't mince his words, Christopher Jericho, does he? No. And I think, to be fair, he's got a point in, you know, like if NXT has been moved to TV to compete with AEW Dynamite, they have been failing ultimately to beat them week in and week out for a good few months now. They've had a few weeks over the course of their history where they have bested AEW in terms of overall viewership, but never in the right demographics. You know, they have had to pull some pretty big strings to achieve that. I think, you know, they've had to have main roster talent appear on NXT to kind of get that bump. They've had to build it around takeover quality matches on NXT TV, and you know, they should be doing that anyway because that's what makes a good TV show. But it was interesting when NXT moved to Tuesdays last week and seeing that bump in viewership because you know, NXT isn't a product that people don't want to watch. I think NXT is a product that people don't have time to watch when AEW is also on at the same time, when there is so much wrestling in a week already to kind of view. Like, you know, just to keep up with WWE in a week, you have to watch 7 hours of TV. That's a lot of TV to get through in a week. Like, you know, even if you're the sort of person who binges a load of, like, you binged all the boys on a Saturday or whatever it was, like it's still a lot of TV to watch every week, especially at fixed times. So, you know, moving to NXT to Tuesday just gives everyone breathing room. And we've said before on WrestleTalk that, you know, it would make our lives a lot easier because we can't do this live because AEW is live. And it just doesn't work out really in terms of, like, even just the way that YouTube works, like peeling back the curtain. There's an algorithm there that, like, will stop it suggesting videos to you if we put out too many in the space of 24 hours. So we have to stagger our videos to fit them all in, to make sure that people actually get notified, to make sure that people actually watch the videos, because otherwise, what's the point in making videos? Do you think, Adam?
You're right.
That so I do actually just think it makes sense, and I do, you know, it is almost kind of stubbornness on the part of NXT to continue a war that they're losing in this sense. Like, you know, if it is a war. I do think that, yeah, I know it's not a war. It's the equivalent of someone with their hand on your head holding you back and you're swinging your arms and you can't hit them. And, like, that's not to say that NXT is a bad product and not to say that AEW is any better a product. It's just to say that that is just where people's viewing habits go. AEW is the fresh new kid on the block, offering you, like, some of the biggest names on the independent scene in wrestling doing their thing every week. And it's not under the WWE banner. WWE's main programming hasn't really generated... Like, doesn't earn the loyalty that it gets, I don't think, necessarily Raws and SmackDowns, do they? Like, people are still very loyal to watching WWE, but I think a lot of people feel let down on a weekly basis. So they won't really go, well, I'm going to watch the third level of that company's product. You know, I'm already watching Raw and SmackDown, and I think they're absolutely bobbing. So why would I then go and subject myself to some guys who are, you know, as far as we know, still in the developmental brand and therefore still learning the wrestling? So...
Yes. Gargano and Ciampa
are doing
their best to pick up
I know, but it's still the sort of semantic look of it, isn't it? I think it still sort of looks that way outside.
And it's when you compare that to the fact that Dynamite is AEW's flagship show, it's just like, well, it doesn't really compare. It would be a lot more convenient for us if they moved, and therefore they should. My initial reaction to it was I find the whole narrative tiresome anyway. Like WWE versus AEW, just whichever side is speaking, I don't care. But I will say, I was originally going to say that I thought NXT should stay because competition, I think, breeds innovation. Yes, NXT are losing, but WWE was losing to WCW once upon a time. They had to step their pussy up, as RuPaul would say. And my initial thought was just do that, but then again, they programmed really hard on Super Tuesday, so I don't know. I just want to see NXT. And this will dovetail into what we thought of this week's episode. I want to see NXT putting on significant programming. I feel like NXT might be more likely to put on significant programming when they're up against AEW and Dynamite. But they were up against AEW and Dynamite this week, and they didn't put on significant programming. This week's episode was fine, but it was very much an episode about, hey, guess what's going to be great? Next week's episode of NXT. So it's just
when AEW might be doing something.
I do find generally the conversation a bit kind of like, but for us, and I think for generally wrestling fans, it's not that big a war. It's not the Monday Night Wars. It's not worth inconveniencing the viewing habits of people who just want to see good wrestling. Because to be honest, the best two wrestling shows being released on a weekly basis are NXT and Dynamite, and it would be super nice if we didn't have to choose or have to watch one of them on catch up, because both of them, both shows knock Raw and SmackDown to a cocked hat. So essentially, it would be nice if we were able to cover the quality wrestling in the most financially lucrative way for the company, i.e. us, i.e. on a platform with Super Chat.
Well, this is the thing, isn't it? It's like, the Monday Night War made so much more sense when people didn't have catch-up readily available. When they didn't, when people maybe didn't have a VCR with a record function in order to record one channel while watching another, or any of that stuff that, that these are all mod cons that we live with now. It is now just a bit of a pain to be like, well, I'll sit down and miss the conversation that's happening live on Twitter about NXT because I want to watch AEW and talk about that instead. So yeah, you're just asking people to choose for no real reason, and all it is just a bit of a pain. And you're not really winning anything because, like NXT probably is getting viewing figures. Maybe it's getting viewing figures online similar to like it's Super Tuesday showing. Maybe that's the quantity of people who might watch NXT on catch up and stuff. But those aren't counted in the kind of overnights that are lauded on Twitter and by wrestling pundits and by the companies themselves. These aren't taken into account. So you're just losing a sort of PR battle for no reason.
Yeah.
So you might. And I know that WWE is not the sort of company to back down. One thing WWE has never really done, back down from a fight. But maybe this is the time to just concede and just go, look, we could just go to Tuesday and have a much bigger audience. And then you build bigger stars to bring to Raw and SmackDown in the future. Like, look how, I think Keith Lee is a very good example of someone who obviously was at the forefront of NXT as it went live on TV and was in some of the bigger, the higher viewed episodes, having these sort of marquee matches as well. So he had that, there's this big benefit of that kind of audience growing around him through that. He's also obviously incredibly clippable and gifable, and that has been done to death on Twitter as well. But then they boosted all of that with Survivor Series and the Royal Rumble and all these other little appearances of Keith Lee. So they managed to build a star there and bring him up to the main roster. And there was some bluster about him. But you could do that with everyone. If everyone has seen those people on NXT on a night that's convenient, and they're not instead thinking, oh, Kenny Omega was brilliant last night. Wasn't Pentagon Jr. great? Because AEW Dynamite, like you said, that's their flagship show, and it does just make those guys seem that little bit more important to the overall narrative of the company. Instead of NXT, everyone's watching it just going, I hope they don't go to the main roster and get ruined. Ooh, it always feels like a little side project, NXT. There's that little sort of feeling of like, this is my little secret thing that I'm watching, that everyone else talks about Raw and SmackDown, but here I am watching NXT, seeing all the good wrestling, and I'm sort of on the inside track of what's actually hot in the world of wrestling. So maybe a little bit of that magic would be lost if it did move to Tuesday, but I do think they'd get more viewers and probably in the right demographics. And like Chris Jericho said, it's not, the demo god thing. It is a gimmick, obviously, but it's also a gimmick based on truth, as all the sort of best gimmicks are to some degree. They have that sort of wrinkle of actuality to them. And I think, being able to say, like, when I'm on the show, we do better in the demos. I mean, they do better in the demo anyway, but it just does feel like NXT probably should just bow out here. Like, AEW's got Wednesdays wrapped up, and both companies maybe. I don't know. I also think maybe AEW should just think about moving as well, because they
change places.
Yeah, but you know, but both companies are, kind of cutting off their nose to spite their face here. There is a bigger viewership for both of them if they weren't competing over the same one, and ultimately, like, what they're thinking about is a war between themselves of like backwards and forwards of who's going to have the most viewers of wrestling fans tonight. And it's like, what you should be thinking about is where you come in the rankings of TV shows overall, because there's plenty of other stuff on TV that's beating you. And you might sneak a few places up the overall watch list on TV if you just had the full audience of wrestling fans who are going to watch you that night. Like, that's not an issue that Raw necessarily has. I know Raw's viewership was pretty bad this week, but like, previously Raw has been very consistently high in terms of like the overall programming on US TV. And I just think like NXT and AEW could be in that upper echelon if they weren't just fighting over this floating 250,000 people that there are. I just think it's mad.
It's so silly. Like, I don't care about ratings. I'm sure the companies do. I'm sure whoever wins this kind of floating voter, 250,000 people, I'm sure that matters to someone. All that matters to me is the quality of NXT programming. And I just think, how you feel on this issue, just like, how does NXT programming compare now, that now that it's gone up against AEW? For me, when NXT first started on TV, I thought it was brilliant. Like, it was really exciting stuff. But it has got a little bit kind of, not desperate, that's the wrong word, but it's like, it's very transparent what they're trying to do, with the Great American Bash popping up for no reason. With like doing these insanely kind of big grabs, like we're doing a double championship match, to try and program against Fighter Fest. And it's like, it does it make the content better? It sometimes it does. Sometimes it doesn't, because sometimes they have to rush storylines in order to get to build these huge things. Like having to. I only care in so much as I want to watch good TV. NXT was always doing fine booking wise when it didn't have to grab ratings. Like the golden era of NXT on TV is when it was buried on the internet somewhere. Like that is when it booked its best. And maybe if it did just bow out and not worry about having to get to pop that rating every single time, like there's going to be a lot of people that subscribe to that Vince Russo being like, there should always be something amazing happening, should always be something major. So I think both sides are right. It's just like, for me, I think if it just ends the conversation, makes our job takes a bit of the pressure off NXT from constantly having to do kind of quite as nakedly transparent counter programming, because you really do get a bit of a whiff of main roster on that. For me, like it's much of a muchness, and you can agree either way. But for me, yes, I think they should move to Tuesday.
I just think, it's funny that the move to Tuesday would be interesting, because even just from a sort of performance perspective, they could likely coast a little bit more on a Tuesday and be doing better in the ratings. Like, you know, they wouldn't have to be out there doing such intense stuff. I would obviously still love them to be performing at the level they're performing every week and doing these large scale things. But yeah, I think when NXT was hidden on the internet, like you said, it was 1 hour of perfectly plotted, perfectly paced television. And sure, there were little filler matches here and there, and there was just getting somebody over, and there was a bunch of squash time for someone in a sort of 3-week build up to starting their feud. That's all fine. The benefit I saw in going to 2 hours on TV was that, yeah, you could get a longer pay-per-view level match on TV. And they definitely did that for the first little bit. And now they've kind of settled, and it's been a weird year. We can all admit it's been a very weird year. So like, I'm not blaming NXT at all for having certain matches which are just fine, perfectly good matches with not really much build going into them. But yeah, it does feel like a little bit this year has been coasting, and then these huge spikes of like, we need to do something in like 2 weeks time, and they didn't really plan for that, so we're just zooming into that. And then like even the way that takeovers have been built, obviously takeover 30 I think was very well built, but takeover in your house felt very rushed. This next takeover feels pretty rushed, frankly, like, you know, because we had the Great American Bash, we had Super Tuesday, and we've just literally come out of Super Tuesday, and now we're just doing like, and now the next takeover it's in 2 weeks or 3 weeks or something like that. It's very soon, and like, so we're just going to have a bunch of multi-person matches to decide number one contenders. That's not a way to really make me massively invested in this feud that we're going to go into. Like, you know, Finn Balor's just going to go up against one dude who wins this match. Sure, like that's definitely worked in the past. Like Kofi won a gauntlet match, didn't he? Kofi won a gauntlet match to get into the match with Daniel Bryan, but they built that over time. Once he won the gauntlet match, there was a lot of story to be done. So I just think it's a shame that NXT this year has felt like it's just sort of a lot of sort of coasting, and then these huge spikes of like activity where they've had to build something really quickly. And maybe that's just part and parcel of a year in which you don't know what's coming next and what you'll be allowed to do week to week, so they're just having to do it as they go. But you did that on a Tuesday, all that stuff's getting more views, and people probably be less, but like, you know, overall you maybe wouldn't have to be doing such big disruptive events like the Great American Bash or Super Tuesday, which, you know, obviously it was great that Super Tuesday kind of was happening because they needed to crown a new champion at short notice. That's fair enough. But Super Tuesday also has disrupted the build to the next takeover, really, when you think about it. So yeah, I guess like if you didn't have to do these bits of again, I'm saying that, but Super Tuesday was on a Tuesday. But like, yeah, if you weren't counter programming to AEW,
they just did that because of, you know, they had to because of Karrion Kross. But like, I think we've spent a lot of time talking about this because there is a huge amount of like stuff to talk about on this week's NXT, and I think that's kind of the interesting thing, really, because this week's NXT is a good wrestling show.
Oh yeah,
good wrestling show. Good matches happen. Shotzi match is good. The main event is good. The tag match is really good. Like, that's the thing, is like, it's not a lot of storyline development, but it's a lot of good wrestling. And I just think like it's a lot less pressure when that doesn't go up against AEW's flagship show, because like if you're forced to choose, right, and you turn into NXT and you see an episode like this, and then you hear about, you know, oh, this amazing street fight and blah 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 that's happening in AEW, you might just be like, oh well, not much has happened this week's NXT, I'll tune into AEW next week, and maybe you won't come back. Whereas if you tune into NXT, you know, if you tuned in to watch this episode of NXT on a Tuesday, be just like, that was a good solid hour of wrestling. That I'll be back next week.
I don't feel like I've wasted my time or missed out on something else. And I think that's the thing, is like, you know, I think the key to it is that ultimately everyone who watches wrestling is a wrestling fan. And whether that's, you know, you're loyal to AEW or WWE, I think people were just a bit tribal about it. And there's no point. You're just cheating yourself by not watching the other one, frankly. But yeah, ultimately, I just think it's a situation in which people do just feel like they're missing out. And like you said, that they will transfer across to the other one if they feel like one isn't living up to their expectations, because this is this is a war for I've made the right choices on my viewing habits on a Wednesday night. And that's ultimately, it's the same as, you know, people fighting over whether they're going to buy the new PlayStation or the new Xbox. People just want to make the right choices about things where you can't really go back and make a different choice. So yeah, it would be fine if it was a Tuesday and you were just like, that's great wrestling. I've enjoyed my 2 hours. See you next Tuesday. And then, you know, and then AEW can happen on a Thursday still.
NXT
right. Well,
is pretty much all. Basically, I think, yeah, I'll give you my final thought on it, which is NXT is pretty much always good. It's pretty much always good. Like, I haven't really sat down and watched an episode of NXT and just gone, that wasted my time. And sometimes, quality-wise, NXT beats AEW. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it's just that I think where Chris Jericho is right in one key respect is that NXT is never, unless they try and do it artificially, NXT is never going to feel like a more important watch than AEW. AEW Dynamite is the only show that AEW puts out weekly. It's the only time where you get to see all of the AEW stars. NXT will never feel as important as that. And when they try to make NXT feel as required viewing as that, it occasionally comes back to bite them or makes it feel like, oh, this is just a bit desperate, or oh, that's a bit like stop counter programming, or blah blah blah. You know, like NXT's great, and I feel like, yeah, let's just put it on a separate day so that both shows can just be great. We can stop using the words Wednesday Night War. I'm tired of it.
Yeah. Well, NXT's in that funny position where they're they're part of the much bigger company and yet somehow still the underdog in this scenario. So they've got that there's a really weird dynamic where it feels like they're both punching down and then trying to attack the bigger guy to get a bit of like PR or rep at the same time. It's a really strange dynamic. And I don't think either of those two ways of thinking about it really makes NXT look good in this. Like AEW just seems like they would just try, like they've always seemed, I know they've attacked WWE a little bit in sort of metaphorical circumstances. Cody definitely smashed a throne at one point with a sledgehammer, but like AEW just seems like something that has started and is trying to make a name for itself, and NXT has that cynical air behind it of WWE doing a bit of corporate maneuvering, and maybe just moving it to Tuesday night absolves you of that issue. It's not a defeat. It's just giving the really good wrestlers who perform on NXT the viewership that they probably deserve, because they are busting their asses every week doing amazing matches. And yeah, whether or not there is the storyline always to back it up is another thing, but they probably have a little bit more room to tell the storylines without having to constantly be like, here's Charlotte Flair for 4 weeks. Here's Becky Lynch. Here's someone else. Like, we're just going to add stuff in now to make you watch. I think NXT would have a much better time on a Tuesday